Hello everybody, this is the project. As you can imagine, it's not particularly light, but it has been cobbled together, and I apologize in advance for using the word project, which I'm sure most of you associate with a random weirdo on the internet cobbling together something silly and then begging for attention. This here is something completely not like that, because what I'm doing here is something completely groundbreaking. Anyway, in the previous video I told you what I was intending to do. In this video I'm going to tell you what I've actually done, and in the next video I'm going to be ranting quite a bit, and I'm going to tell you what are my riding impressions and how does this bike compare to my other machines. But for now, let's go through the build. See? Script. I wrote something. Soon enough, these videos aren't going to be 40-minute rambly mess with no point at the end. Maybe one day I'll even fix the crappy audio. Let us not get ahead of ourselves. The core of the cockpit of this bike is made out of Zoom engineering, 120mm 1-inch clamp stem and 580mm or almost 600mm wide straight mountain bike handlebars. Both of these together cost me about $10 when converted from the local funny money. The 3 bars / aero bars were another $10 on top of that, and after clamping them I've gotten my first problem, because I have clamped them really hard. So hard in fact I was afraid I'm going to strip the threads of the clamps, when I assumed the aero position of the bike I could just twist both extensions without using much force or much issue. So in order to fix this, I have added several strips of grip tape between the clamps and the main handlebar, and so far it seems to hold. However, you know, it's a workaround, so I wait the moment when it stops working. The extensions on the ends of the main handlebar is something I have actually splurged a little bit, because I could have gotten something cheaper. But those which are there are those which I use as a standard, and I am very used to them. I know how to set them with the rest of the bike, so they cost $10, not 5. Anyway, the grips is something I simply found in the Leopard's bin, so they were pretty much free. And one more thing, on the previous video Oleg suggested that I should use a butterfly bar, and I remember that I actually have one of these, something like this, and I have installed the Alhonga levers here, because at some point I think I'm going to try to actually go with his suggestion. Well, this is actually one of the reasons why I have went with the 1-inch clamp for the stem. And the reason is that if you squint your eyes really hard, this looks like a really disfigured drop bar. So you can grip it like this or like this, and it seems to be pretty aero. So we'll see, it might be pretty interesting. When it comes to the saddle and the seat post, well, they are another $10 each item which I have bought new. Why? Because it's something that in hindsight seems pretty obvious, but it wasn't so obvious when I was buying the parts. When it comes to the cheap stuff, people generally don't sell used things, even though I searched for a little bit. Even if someone was listing something used, I could get something new cheaper. So what was the point? So there we are. New seat, Lyoshi, $10, and a new Zoom, obviously, seat post. And the only problem I have with this is that, two actually. One problem I have with this is that there is only a single bolt clamp, which is going to make a problem to make a micro adjustment when it comes to the saddle angle. And the other problem I have is that, well, it's 27.2mm seat post. I weigh about 100 kilograms or 220 pounds, and it's Zoom engineering. So I hope it's going to hold. but this hope might be a little misplaced. Oh, and the seat, the saddle, not the seat, this is not recumbent. The saddle is epically uncomfortable. However, interestingly, when it's used on this particular bike, it isn't. That's one interesting thing I'm going to discuss in the next video. Anyway, let's talk drivetrain. My concerns about the clearance between the chainring and the chainstay proved to be a little premature, because after installing everything I had a healthy 1 centimeter space in there. So I think that if 46 tooth proves to be a little too small or not too long enough for the gearing I need, I will switch to 48 or 50 tooth, or at least 48. 50 might have a problem with fitting, although that should be just 4 millimeters more when it comes to the actual radius of the chainring. Anyway, the crankset is a Jankum X6, so not X5 and not X7, so certainly not SRAM, even though the font says otherwise. And the chainring is Racework 46 tooth. The entire assembly, after putting it together, proved to be a little wobbly, so the chainring was doing like that, about 2 millimeters in the entire circumference of the chainring. However, I fixed that using good old-fashioned violence, because violence solves every problem. And there isn't really anything more interesting about that, because it just works. And of course, I tried to find something used locally, but the cheapest ring I could find was about $40, and the chainring, chain set, bottom bracket cost me just $60, so that didn't seem to be very reasonable. The pedals are Dartmoor something something something, $12. When it comes to the rear shifty bits, I had a little problem, because from the start I wanted to use 1x12, but then again I thought to myself that do I really need to faff with this? And then I thought to myself that why shouldn't I? Then I thought to myself, you know, analysis, paralysis. In the end, however, I did set it up, and it was quite a little bit of an adventure, because, as you can imagine, fitting a 12-speed cassette, which is road only, on a 10-speed hub, which is certainly not 12-speed road, proved to be a little challenging. And in order to show the process, I'm going to switch to my assistant, which is me from the past, and show you how it was done. This is the rear wheel I'm going to be using. And if you are of a curious mind, you should ask, how is it that I am able to fit a 12-speed cassette, which is over here, on a hub which is Shimano Saint, which is only 10-speed compatible. It uses the standard HG free hub, which is narrower than the road free hub, like on this thing. If we measure this, it comes out at 36.7 millimeters. So, what did I do to make this fit? Let me show you. First of all, the first part to note is find my chain whip, which is obviously somewhere else. There you go. The chain whip I'm going to use to take out or take off the cassette. The first fact to ponder is the lock rings on 12-speed cassettes, at least those coming from China, are a little deeper than those that come on 10 and 11-speed cassettes. On 11 I think might be the same, but 10-speed are definitely not as deep as this one. And this is going to be important. Now, you can see everything fits. However, as you can see, there is very little spline of the free hub going from below this 12 tooth, and 11 tooth, if we were to match it here, it barely fits on the free hub. However, this isn't much of an issue, because obviously this is made of steel, and the free hub is also made of steel, so even this minimal interference is enough to carry the torque on the 11 tooth, because the torque on the 11 tooth is the least of all the possible cogs. Moreover, the deeper than usual lock ring, like this one, once you are going to torque everything down to spec, so 40 Newton meters, and then the plastic shims or spaces that are going to be or are inside are going to be squeezed a little bit, which is going to increase the interference between the 11 tooth and the spline. So this is fine. However, this doesn't solve the problem of the cassette being physically wider than the free hub that's underneath. So let me take this out. This is a little foreshadowing. However, if we measure the width of the spline on this free hub, we are going to arrive at a number of approximately, no, this is too small, of approximately 34.5, if I recall correctly. There you go, 34.6 millimeters, which is about 2 millimeters narrower than that one. So a cassette that's meant for a 11 speed or 11-12 tooth or 11-12 speed Rode free hub isn't going to fit on this particular thing. This originally was a 12-speed Rode cassette from China. This is a Sunshine 1134. As you can see, it has a aluminum spider on the back, and I have taken out, using my lathe, about 3 millimeters of material from the back of the spider, which is more than the difference in width between Rode and mountain bike free hub. However, if I tried to install this, it wouldn't fit. First of all, I have taken more material than I would otherwise need to, because I didn't know how much material I really need to take out in order to fit all the cogs. However, using my newfound powers of DIN 988 shims, or bearing placement shims, I was able to find the thickness which I need to add below the cassette to allow the spider, once everything is torqued down, to rotate freely. And since this hub has a really low flange on the drive side, there is physically more space for the cassette to overhang over the spokes. So this one is actually 0.5, 0.1, 0.2 and 0.5 for a total of 1.3, and I have the thickest ones as a sandwich between the thinner ones. I install this here, then I install the spider, and there's no interference. The clearance there is very slight, about 0.2, 0.3 of a millimeter, eyeballing it. However, this should be sufficient, considering that everything here has been built to a, let's call it, enduro standard, so everything is pretty stiff. The end result is that I can surely use a 12-speed Rode cassette on an otherwise 11-speed, or 10-speed actually, 10-speed mountain bike rear hub. Now, watch this, because the spacers aren't really compressed here. It's actually kind of fiddly to find the correct place for everything. So now I have the interference on the 11 tooth. I add my lock ring, which is deeper than usual. I catch the first thread. Did I? I probably did. And then we torque everything precisely using the torque wrench. To some obscene value. And there you go. Thank you, my assistant, myself for the best. When it comes to a derailleur, I wanted initially to use this Shimano Saint. As you very well know, because this is an XTR level derailleur from 20 years ago, almost. It's going to be 20 years in a year, and it weighs 350 grams, and it has a medium cage, so it would fit the theme of the bike pretty well. Unfortunately, it has one problem. It's me being lazy, because the through axle I made out of a piece of scrap metal proved to be too short to hold the derailleur securely. If you don't know, the old Saints, the first generation, were held with a through axle that was threading directly to the derailleur, so you know. A universal hanger, or what are they calling this? Transmission. Directly to the axle. Best idea ever. This is extremely awkward if you want to take out the wheel, so it would fit perfectly. Unfortunately, I'm too lazy to make another axle, so my another choice was to use something I've gotten from my contacts in the biz. You see, I wanted to use this Shimano Dura Ace unreleased oversized pulley system, which I procured by illegal means. I mean, Altus, that's the black box of Shimano, right? Anyway, with this one, the problem was that the overhang of the girthy 12-speed cassette proved to be too high, and I was hitting the spokes with the cage on the inside. So, with that possibility out of the way, or out of question, actually out of the way and out of question, once again I'm talking too much, I used my trusty 9-speed Caprio, which is held onto the hanger with a force of a friction, because I had to wiggle it in order to clear the entire cassette. Now, the control end of my transmission is being handled by a $3, well, 4 actually, because I need to include the shipping, but I've gotten 2, so $2 shifter by Saiguan, which I can say with conviction is absolutely terrible, because when you move the pedal you get more or less random gear at the end. And that's about it. As you can imagine from my handlebars and from my promises in the previous video, I'm going to be using my Hayes dyno and my front brake. It's there, it works, it's great. When it comes to the rear brake, however, I bought this bootleg TRP Spire branded Tupri from AliExpress for about 10 bucks. And in the future, pretty near future actually, I'm going to be comparing it to an actual TRP Spire, which I also own. That brake is being fed by a Shimano V-brake lever, and I've done so specifically because I wanted to have as much space in the rear caliper before the pads engage the rotor. The reason for this is that with a really long housing, it's pretty difficult to have both pretty quick engagement of the pads and enough clearance for the pads not to rattle on the rear rotor, because that's pretty infuriating. It's a life hack of sorts. However, this also confirms, after riding this, that this is a road pull caliper, and I think it's going to compare pretty favorably to actual TRP Spire. And the side effect of this is that my rear brake is kind of weak. I mean, I knew it's going to be weak, but because the setup, the V-brake lever to a road disc caliper is always pretty weak, but it's weaker than I think it should be, and I think the culprit there are the pads. So this is something I'm going to be checking in the future. I have a pair of EBC Gold pads, which cost as much as the entire caliper. I'm going to switch them around and see what happens. You might have caught a glimpse of my rotors. I am not using the custom-made ones I promised before, because the front one proved to be a little crooked, and I didn't want to be truing the rotor because I wouldn't be fast. I really have no reason for not doing this other than being lazy. So I decided to use the Shimano RT56, I think they are. The lowest tier of center lock rotors. I put them, they are there, and I found them in my dumpster because they came on my wife's e-bike and they are almost worn out. They are 1.62 millimeters or something like that. They are pretty much trash, but they are going to fit the bike perfectly, I guess. In my previous video, I told you what sort of wheels I'm going to be using. As a refresher, Shimano Saint 10-speed rear hub, Shimano XT 20mm through-axle hub converted to 50mm, and Dartmoor Raider rims, which are 24mm inside with it. And on those, I have almost decided to buy 25mm Continental Ultra Sport tires. However, when I was hovering my cursor on the buy now button, I have found 28mm version of those tires, which was even better quality because it was folding. So obviously those are those which I actually bought. And after pumping them to an operating pressure on those rims, they have ballooned to 30.5mm, so pretty comfy, to be honest. And, well, as a test, I also put that 28mm tire on a... what is the name of this? Alex Rims Volar, I think. 30mm inside width, tubeless ready, and I have pumped it to like 6 bars, so 80 psi, and it has ballooned to 34mm. It was quite girthy, to be honest, and that was totally useless because that's something I'm going to be using, and I don't know why I'm mentioning this. I guess to make this video longer, because that's what I do. And I do this. Not talking about any of this here. You see? See this? Why are you even watching this so far? Anyway, getting that tire out of that 30mm rim required me to be really ungentlemanly, and I have damaged my front tire a little bit, so I hope it's not going to blow up on me. Anyway, what about the entire project? I have already put some miles on the bike, or kilometers. We are in a metric zone, so I put some kilometers on the bike, about 150 or so. And my first impressions are, well, interesting. And I'm going to be talking about them in the next video a bit more. Anyway, my plan for the next video, which is something I am doing but I haven't yet completed, is that I'm going to ride 3 specific Strava segments, which are pretty long and are pretty friendly to a time trial bike because they are fairly flat but not too flat. The road surface is pretty rough but not too rough, and they are pretty close to me, so I know what I can expect of. What I'm going to do is ride each segment 5 times on my road bike, or road bike. I know there are some of you who are going to be arguing whether my road bike is a road bike. And I'm going to compare them against something that is definitely not a time trial bike. It only has this fairly aggressive time trialing position. And well, we'll see what happens. Anyway, I hope you've been entertained. At least this video wasn't too long, and I hope to see you on the next one.